In the tranquil small town of Oakville, the Thompson family lived a seemingly normal life. Sarah Thompson, an energetic and ambitious woman in her early 40s, had made a name for herself as a successful estate agent. With her charm and determination, she quickly gained the trust of her clients. Her ambition drove her to constantly take on new challenges, which earned her great professional recognition. Her husband, Robert, in his mid-40s, was the exact opposite, a quiet and reserved accountant who valued security and routine. He was conscientious and reliable in his work, but often felt overshadowed by his dynamic wife. Robert's leisure time was characterized by simple pleasures such as gardening or reading historical novels. Sarah's daughter, Laura, from her first marriage, who had just turned 17, completed the household. She was a bright girl with a passion for art. She spent hours in her room painting and drawing, displaying a remarkable talent for abstract visualization. Laura dreamed of studying at a prestigious art academy after leaving school. From the outside, everything seemed fine. Sarah was proud of her career and her family. She had worked hard to get back on her feet after her divorce. The separation from Laura's father had been painful, but Sarah had vowed never to be dependent on a man again. She had built up her career with iron discipline and raised her daughter on the side. In Robert, she believed she had finally found the perfect partner, reliable, down-to-earth, and loving towards Laura. His calm nature complemented Sarah's temperament well, and she appreciated the stability he brought to her life. She often boasted to friends about how happy she was with her patchwork family. But beneath the surface, tensions and suppressed feelings were simmering. Robert had long felt unfulfilled in his marriage. His wife Sarah was often busy with work and had little time for him. Dinners for two became rarer, and weekend outings together were the exception. Although he admired her ambition, he often felt small and insignificant next to her. In quiet moments, when he sat alone in his study, he wondered whether, at the age of 45, he had already achieved everything life had to offer. A vague longing for excitement and adventure gnawed at him. He dreamed of breaking out of his usual rut, but never dared to express these thoughts to Sarah. Laura, on the other hand, had a difficult relationship with her mother. She often felt under pressure from Sarah to fulfill her high expectations. Sarah's constant pressure to get good grades and prepare for a decent career stifled Laura's artistic ambitions. At the same time, she longed for more attention and emotional closeness. The times when mother and daughter had intimate conversations or laughed together seemed to be a thing of the past. Surprisingly, Laura found Robert to be a patient listener to her problems and worries. Unlike her mother, he made time for her, took a genuine interest in her artistic projects, and made her feel understood. Laura enjoyed this attention and increasingly sought out Robert's company. What began as a harmless rapprochement between stepfather and stepdaughter was to develop over time into a serious entanglement that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. Their first intimate encounter took place one afternoon when Sarah was on a business trip. Laura had asked Robert for help with an art project. As they worked together in her room, they accidentally touched, which triggered an electrifying tension between them. Before they really realized it, they were kissing passionately. Both were plagued by feelings of guilt afterwards, but couldn't stop thinking about each other. In the weeks that followed, they secretly sought each other out again and again. Each time they swore to each other that it would be the last time, only to succumb to temptation again shortly afterwards. Their affair became a dangerous game of secrecy and repressed feelings. They met in hidden corners of the house, exchanged furtive glances across the dining table, and invented excuses to spend time together. The fear of discovery mingled with the thrill of the forbidden. Robert knew that his behavior was unforgivable. He was Laura's stepfather, a confidant he should have protected. Instead, he exploited her emotional vulnerability and risked destroying her future. But he seemed powerless against the feelings Laura aroused in him. Laura, for her part, vacillated between euphoria and self-doubt. Part of her enjoyed the attention and the feeling of being desired. Another part knew that the relationship was wrong and would break her mother's heart if she found out. But the intensity of her feelings for Robert eclipsed all rational considerations. For months, they managed to keep their secret. But then the first cracks began to appear in the facade. Sarah noticed that Laura was behaving even more withdrawn towards her than usual. Robert also often seemed absent and avoided any deeper conversation. Sarah initially put it down to stress at work and typical teenage problems. but her instinct told her that something was wrong. She began to pay closer attention to the interactions between Robert and Laura. Small gestures, furtive glances, a certain tension when they were in the same room, all fueled Sarah's growing suspicions. She secretly searched Robert's mobile phone and Laura's diary, but found no clear evidence. The uncertainty gnawed at Sarah. She became increasingly suspicious and irritable. Her work suffered and she began to drink more than usual. Robert and Laura noticed the change in her behavior and became even more cautious in their encounters. The atmosphere in the house was characterized by an underlying tension. One Saturday evening in late summer, Sarah returned earlier than expected from a business trip. As she entered the house, she heard muffled voices from the upper floor. She crept quietly up the stairs. What she saw when she opened the door to Laura's room would change her life forever. Robert and Laura were lying closely together on the bed, in an intimate moment that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. For a few seconds, Sarah froze petrified in the doorway. Then a storm of emotions broke over her. Shock, disbelief, disgust, and raging anger. With a blood-curdling scream, she threw herself at Robert and Laura. What followed was a chaotic scene full of shouting, tears, and mutual accusations. Sarah was beside herself with anger and pain at this double betrayal. She called Robert a perverted child molester and Laura an ungrateful traitor. Robert tried to explain the situation and calm her down, but Sarah was unable to listen to him. In her fury, she grabbed anything she could get her hands on and threw it at the two of them. A heavy table lamp hit Robert on the head and gave him a bleeding laceration. Laura, completely overwhelmed by the situation, broke down crying and begged her mom to calm down. But Sarah was unstoppable. She grabbed her daughter roughly by the arm and dragged her out of the room. With trembling hands, she dialed the emergency number and called the police. The next few hours passed like a surreal nightmare. Police officers arrived, took statements, and finally arrested Robert on suspicion of sexual abuse of a minor. Laura was taken into care by child welfare officers. Sarah was left alone in the house that had been her home just a few hours before. In the days and weeks that followed, Sarah's carefully constructed life collapsed like a house of cards. The news of the scandals spread like wildfire through the small town. Sarah was subjected to suspicious glances and whispered comments everywhere she went. Her career suffered badly as a result. Many customers no longer wanted anything to do with her. Robert was released on bail, but was not allowed to approach Laura. He temporarily moved in with his brother in another town. Laura was placed in a foster family. Contact between mother and daughter was reduced to a minimum and characterized by tensions and mutual accusations. Sarah fell into a deep depression. She felt betrayed by all the people closest to her. She was unable to find stability either at work or in her private life. Alcohol became her constant companion. She often lay awake at night, thinking about what she had done wrong and how it could have come to this. The longer Sarah thought about the situation, the more she spiraled into anger and feelings of revenge. She blamed Robert solely for everything. In her eyes, he had destroyed her marriage, abused her daughter, and ruined her whole life. The thought that he could possibly get off with a suspended sentence was unbearable for her. On that fateful night, Sarah's emotional turmoil reached its peak. Drunk on alcohol and driven by feelings of revenge, she reached for the gun she had once bought to protect herself. With trembling hands, she loaded the gun and made her way to Robert's temporary home with his brother. It was just after midnight when Sarah arrived outside the house. Her heart was racing as she got out of the car and went to the front door. She rang the doorbell, the gun firmly in her hand. When Robert opened the door, he froze at the sight of his wife with the gun. All the color drained from his face when he saw the determination in her eyes. Instinctively, he tried to slam the door shut, but Sarah was quicker. With a strength she would not have believed herself capable of, she forced her way into the house. What happened over the next few minutes remains controversial. Sarah later claimed that she had only wanted to confront Robert. The gun had accidentally gone off when he tried to snatch it from her. He spoke a different language. 3 shots hit Robert in the chest and stomach, a number that was difficult to explain as accidental. The prosecution argued that Sarah had come with a clear intention to kill. Presumably, there was a violent confrontation. Sarah shouted at Robert, accusing him of destroying her life. Robert possibly tried to explain himself or flee. In a moment of blind rage and desperation, Sarah pulled the trigger. The first shot hit Robert in the chest. He staggered backwards, staring in disbelief at the spreading bloodstain. The second and third shots followed in quick succession, hitting him in the stomach. Robert collapsed, his blood seeping onto the floor. Sarah stood there stunned, the smoking gun still in her hand. Slowly, she began to realize what she had done. Anger gave way to horror and remorse. When the police arrived, alerted by neighbors who had heard the shots, they found Sarah kneeling next to Robert's lifeless body. She offered no resistance when she was arrested. Her last look was for the man she had once loved and now killed. These tragic moments would change the lives of all involved forever and set the stage for the sensational trial that would follow. The trial caused a nationwide sensation. The media pounced on the story of betrayal, forbidden love, and deadly revenge. Experts discussed the psychological background to the case. Was Sarah Thompson a betrayed wife who took up arms in a moment of mental derangement? Or was she a cold-blooded murderer who wanted to eliminate an inconvenient witness? The public prosecutor pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. They argued that Sarah had carefully planned the offense and carried it out with intent. The defense, on the other hand, argued manslaughter in the heat of passion. Sarah had been in a state of extreme emotional stress due to the traumatic events and had lost control. Laura testified as a witness. Her testimony was a real ordeal for everyone involved. With a shaky voice, she admitted to having had an affair with her stepfather. However, she also emphasized that the relationship had been consensual and that Robert had never forced her to do anything. At the same time, she asked for understanding for her mother, who had been deeply hurt by her behavior. Sarah's lawyers pleaded reduced culpability. Psychological experts attested to her acute stress reaction and depressive episodes at the time of the offense. The public prosecutor, on the other hand, argued that Sarah was still able to recognize the consequences of her actions despite her emotional state. After a 2-week trial, the jury retired to deliberate. The hours of waiting were an ordeal for everyone involved. When the verdict was finally announced, there was a breathless silence in the courtroom. Sarah Thompson was found guilty of manslaughter. The court considered it proven that she had killed Robert in a state of extreme emotional agitation. The jury recognized mitigating circumstances, but rejected an acquittal on the grounds of insanity. The sentence was set at 15 years in prison. Sarah accepted the verdict with outward composure. As she was taken away, she looked at her daughter Laura one last time. For a brief moment, their eyes met, filled with a mixture of sadness, remorse, and unspoken feelings. Laura left the courtroom accompanied by her foster parents. She had decided to start her art studies in another city, far away from the painful memories of her hometown. The burden of what had happened would probably stay with her for the rest of her life. Sarah Thompson began her sentence in a women's prison. The tragedy had changed the lives of everyone involved forever, leaving a community that would struggle with the aftermath for a long time to come. In the weeks following the trial, the small town of Oakville tried to return to normality, but the Thompson case had left deep scars. In cafes and on the streets, people continued to whisper about the events for a long time. Some residents felt guilty for not having recognized the family's problems earlier. Others had heated discussions about who was most to blame, Robert, Sarah, or perhaps even Laura. Laura struggled with severe feelings of guilt and depression in the months that followed. In her new surroundings, she tried to lead a normal student life, but the past kept catching up with her. Nightmares plagued her, and she often wondered whether she could have prevented what had happened if she had ended the affair earlier. In therapy sessions, Laura worked on understanding and processing her complex feelings. She realized that Robert had taken advantage of his position of power as an adult and father figure, despite her supposed consent. At the same time, she struggled to understand her mother, whose violent reaction had shaken her to the core. Sarah Thompson found it difficult to adjust to the prison routine. The first few months were characterized by depression and adjustment difficulties. She struggled with her offense and kept asking herself how she could have lost control so completely. In conversations with the prison psychologist, she slowly began to look at the events from a different perspective. About a year after the trial, Laura took the difficult step of visiting her mother in prison. The meeting was characterized by tension and suppressed emotions. Both women struggled with their feelings, anger, grief, guilt, and a desperate longing for understanding and forgiveness. It was a start, albeit a bumpy one, on the long road to possible reconciliation. The future remained uncertain. Whether Sarah and Laura would ever find their way back to a normal mother-daughter relationship was questionable. But in the difficult conversations and cautious attempts at rapprochement, there was at least the hope of healing and perhaps one day forgiveness.